Mom's fiance stole my $7,000 college savings, and my mom told me to shut up. I had them arrested. Later, I found out my dad left me a huge inheritance which my whole family is using. So my mother and her fiance recently got arrested, and my maternal grandparents are giving me a lot of hate. Asterisk, asterisk. This happened because I called the cops on them, and I had good reason to do that. My mother and I never got along, especially since my dad passed away 10 years ago. I'm 17 now, and in a couple of months, I'm supposed to start college. Unfortunately, I had always known that my mother would never have any money set aside for me, so I knew I would have to work for myself and make my own arrangements. I started working at the age of 14. I would do part-time jobs after school and had been saving for the past 4 years so that I would have at least some money set aside. I would also often get cash from relatives on my birthdays as gifts and sometimes for holidays, so I would set that aside as well. So far, I had saved up almost $7,000 and I was pretty happy about it. It was all in cash, of course, and I kept it safely tucked away in a little corner of my cupboard in a wooden box that my father had carved for me. I didn't have a bank account because my mother never allowed me to create one, so that was out of the question. But I never told my mom or anybody else about that, so I don't know how anyone was able to find it. A couple of days ago, I found that the box was entirely empty. When I asked my mom about it, she told me that her fiancé had taken the money to invest in his new house. I completely lost my mind when I found out what happened. There was a huge fight in the house, me on one side and my mom and her fiancé on the other. But at the end of the day, I'm just 17 and they are in power right now, so I had to concede. The only thing I could do was walk up to my room, lock myself in, and cry for hours. This was my life, and I would have to start from scratch again. I wasn't even sure if I would be able to save enough money for anything before college, and I was just really disheartened and completely lost. That was the day I made up my mind. I was going to get back at them for this because it could not go unanswered. It was pretty big, but thankfully I was able to get my revenge exactly 3 days later. Now, they have been arrested and are paying for the crime they committed. My only problem in this entire situation is that my grandparents, who had always been on my side, are now against me, and it just doesn't make sense to me anymore. My mom's fiancé, I'll call him Rob, has been in my life for the past 2 years, and I've hated every single second of it because he is literally one of the most terrible people I have ever met. I would even go so far as to call him abusive, not physically, but verbally and emotionally. Definitely abusive. My mom usually bears the brunt of it, but occasionally, he loses his temper with me as well. He curses me out, tries his best to make me cry like my mom, and gets even more pissed off when he realizes I don't care, which leads him to lose even more control of his tongue. My mom never bothers to defend me. My mom didn't date anybody for the first couple of years after my dad passed away, but then she met Rob. For the first few months, he was nice and tolerable. But then they had their first big fight, and that's when he started showing his true colors. 6 months into the relationship, he had already started manipulating my mom and had moved in with us. He was a no-good, deadbeat idiot who could barely keep a job. For context, he's in his mid-30s, and he still relies on his parents for money occasionally because he has absolutely no financial sense and is constantly wasting money, way more than what he earns. When he's fighting with my mom, he takes money from his parents. When he's not fighting with my mom, he's comfortable enough to leech off of her. The sad part is that my mom isn't exactly a billionaire who can afford to support her partner and the extravagant lifestyle he wants. She is the floor supervisor at our local supermarket, and while she brings home a decent amount, it's not enough for the kind of lifestyle Rob wants. Anyway, I never let it become a problem for me. I always try to be as independent as I can. Right from the age of 14, I've tried to avoid asking my mother for anything apart from basic necessities, and after I started working part-time, I didn't even ask her to pay for those. I don't ask my mom to buy me anything, and the only thing I rely on her for is probably just shelter and food. That's it. I don't ask her to do anything extra for me or go out of her way, because I know that even expecting that is pretty foolish. She has made it very clear to me from the beginning that she doesn't like me. Even when I was a child, she was never very nice to me, and I always had this feeling that she didn't even want me. As I grew older, that feeling strengthened into a belief. At least before, I had my dad to have my back and stand up to my mom whenever she would get a little too upset with me, but after he passed away, I was on my own, and that's how it has been for the past few years. Things just started getting worse when Rob came around, but I always console myself by telling myself that soon enough, I would go away for college, and I wouldn't have to worry about any of this. Now that seems bleak and unlikely to happen. For the 3 days after my money was taken, I just stayed in my room and didn't do anything because I was so depressed. The day after I learned that all my money had been taken, we moved into our new house, and I did all the work I was required to do, but I did not speak to either of the two people living with me. They didn't seem any worse for it either. On the third day, my mom told me I had to get dressed in the evening because they were hosting a housewarming party. I started screaming at her, telling her I wasn't going to do anything of the sort because she had taken my money. The only reason they had been able to buy the house was because of the money they stole from me. That really pissed my mom off. She told me that now that we were finally living in our own house and not a rented place, I should be happy for them, and I needed to just suck it up and let this one go because I owed them for life, referring to the fact that she had raised me. That doesn't even make sense because she was legally bound to do that, and it wasn't like she did me any huge favors. As for the house, it was too big for the three of us anyway. I knew they bought the house just to impress everyone with their upscale address and spacious home. I was really upset that day, and I did something I hadn't done before. I decided to call up my father's parents. It was kind of complicated because after my dad had passed away, my paternal grandparents had distanced themselves from our family because it was too painful to keep in touch, I guess. I don't know why they had cut ties with us, but we were not on speaking terms anymore. I still had their numbers, so I decided to call them as a last resort since my maternal grandparents, with whom I had a better relationship, were kind of neutral in this context. The day my money had been stolen, I told my mom's parents about it, expecting them to talk to my mom and fix it for me. But they told me they were happy my mom could buy a new house, and on the bright side, we would finally have a place of our own and wouldn't have to worry about rent every month. So they told me to look on the bright side and find the silver lining. I thought that was a pretty weird reaction because so far they had always been on my side. They would never say anything to my mom, but they always sympathized with me. However, this time things were very different, and I didn't understand their reaction. I was really pissed off with them as well, so I didn't contact them again. On the day my mom told me to suck it up, I decided to contact my paternal grandparents, hoping for a different response, one that would give me some hope for the future. I don't know what it was, but something told me to call them, so I did. Thankfully, they answered my call. I told them everything that had happened and explained that I knew they were too hurt to talk to us and didn't want to keep in touch, but this was an emergency. I told them my dad had left me a college fund, and now my mother had taken it. I had been working so hard for the past couple of years to afford college, but now I didn't even know if that was going to happen. My grandfather told me that this was really confusing because apparently my dad had left a college fund for me that he and my grandmother had been saving for years. The fund was still there, untouched. I was stunned. They had kept it for me all these years, and I never knew it existed. But they told me that now they were going to use it for me to attend college as soon as possible. My grandparents promised to help me and that I didn't need to worry anymore. After I hung up with them, I thought for a moment before making my next move. I called the police. The next day, my mom and Rob were arrested. I had proof that they stole my money, and with everything that had happened, the cops were more than happy to investigate. Afterward, they were charged with theft. My family doesn't really know about my grandparents' involvement in this, but they know I had them arrested. Since my mother's fiance has been arrested, things haven't been the same between us. And while I still have no relationship with my mom, I've heard from my maternal grandparents that I'm a selfish and ungrateful person. They told me I had no right to do this, that I was destroying my mother's life, and that I should be ashamed of myself. But I don't care anymore. It feels like a huge weight has been lifted off my shoulders. I'm going to college with the inheritance my dad left me, and that's enough for me. I don't need anyone's approval.